In the UK back in 1982, the ZX Spectrum became the personal computer of choice, simply because it had tons and tons of video games that anyone could play. Nowadays though, it's kind of harder to play the ZX Spectrum on modern televisions, so some guys came out and designed something pretty cool. This is a plug-and-play ZX Spectrum for modern televisions. It's called the ZX Spectrum Vega. Now I know there's a couple you out there at home laughing every time I say ZX Spectrum. Alright guys, here's the letter. Now, say it with me. Z. That's right, okay, that's how we say it in North America, unless you're in Canada. But in the UK, it's pronounced Z, like this.
Z!
Now look, this is how this works. The ZX Spectrum was released in the UK, so technically, we're supposed to be calling it the ZX Spectrum. You could call it the ZX Spectrum if you want, but that just kinda sounds weird. If you've never seen an original ZX Spectrum, well, it looks like this. Now, as you can tell, it pretty much is just a keyboard with a computer built into it, which is how a lot of older computers used to look, like the Commodore 64. But this ZX Spectrum, the one that we got in the mail here, well, this one doesn't have a keyboard on it. And I know what you're thinking, well, aren't you not gonna be able to run everything you would on a normal ZX Spectrum? Well, maybe, but technically not. See, this system uses a pop-down menu from the bottom where you can access an entire keyboard input by utilizing these buttons and this weird system it has built into it. Now, this is one of my biggest concerns with this because, well, I don't like the system they utilized. I was hoping for a virtual keyboard, you know, something you'd see off an Xbox 360, PS4, something like that. What this uses is a very different system that's very complex to use. Now, unfortunately, for certain ZX Spectrum games that are text adventures and stuff like that, you're going to have a real bad time playing with this device. But for a lot of the arcade games that utilize just the regular directional pad and fire button, well, you're golden. This thing's going to run perfectly fine and you're not going to run into any issues. Unless you're taking the game from a ROM you had on the SD card, in which case you're going to have to set everything up yourself, which can be pretty difficult for people that don't know what they're doing. One thing I've always hated with plug-and-play devices is that they usually have very, very short cords. So you know, when you want to plug it up to your TV and sit on your couch, it doesn't reach. Well, you're not going to have a problem with this, because you see this has 115 inches of wire. So much wire. I mean, really, it just goes on and on and on. It's insane. But I kind of am okay with that. I mean, maybe they could have built a wireless one, but that probably would have been too expensive. So at least you've got tons of wire so you can sit pretty much anywhere in your house and it will still reach to your TV. Now, like I said earlier on, the system is made for modern televisions, but I got a question for the guys that made the system. Why did you choose this combination of inputs, an RCA and a USB? See, most modern TVs don't really have this anymore, or at least if they do, they're going to project the image out in really low resolution, which kind of sucks. And if this was made for slightly less modern TVs, like flat screen TVs that have RCA, how would they get power from a USB port that they don't have? It's kind of confusing. When you get this machine in the box, there is no little cable connector that hooks up to this. You have to hook it up to a modern television. And unfortunately, the image that comes out of these things here isn't really, I don't know, high quality enough. I mean, sure, the ZX Spectrum isn't the most beautifully high definition system in the world, and really the games are gonna look like they did back in the 80s. But I would have liked to see an upscale so that the pixels look super sharp. And unfortunately, you're not getting that with these inputs. Well, not the USB, but, you know, these ones here. Now let's talk about the games for a second. There's 1,000 built into this thing, but you can download a whole heck of a lot more. In fact, you can download the entire library of the ZX Spectrum and run it on this device, which is a pretty cool feature. But here's the thing, are you really into ZX Spectrum games? Now, if you're an old gamer from the UK, you probably remember these games and you're gonna love playing them. But if you're from the US and you're not familiar with these classic British games, you're probably gonna be a little bit dumbfounded. They are not the kind of games you probably expect. There are games out there on this platform that are just bizarre and strange and unlike anything you've ever played. In fact, there are whole clones of properties that the people that made these games didn't actually own, where they were just fans of things, like Doctor What, which is essentially a Doctor Who clone. And you know what else is on this system? Star Fox. Star Fox! Not that Star Fox, but this Star Fox, which looks nothing like the Star Fox we have come to know and love. But there's a whole bunch on there that are pretty fun to play. In fact, some of the original Rare games that came out, and when I mean Rare, I mean the granddaddy Rare. Rare that made Donkey Kong Country and GoldenEye. That Rare. They used to make games for this platform years and years ago, and some of their games are actually built onto this. In fact, if you've ever played Jetpack, Jetpack is on this system, and it's really fun to play. But once again, if you're not into really old games, you're probably not going to enjoy this thing too much. Still, for me, I appreciate the history and the nostalgia of it, and it's really fun. The simple interface that they use to start up Jetpack is easy to get into and easy to play, and I have to say it's probably easier to play Jetpack on this than it is to play it on a real ZX Spectrum. I'm a sucker for products designed in the 80s, and the ZX Spectrum looked really sleek. And this thing here is taking the same design of the ZX Spectrum keyboard and computer and implementing it in a handheld feel. The only problem is, that doesn't work really well when you're thinking about controllers. It's a square with hard edges, and it's not that comfortable to hold. Now, while the buttons are nice and rubbery and the D-pad there is actually got a really good feel to it, it's not the best design in the world, and I would have preferred something that was a little bit more rounded off. Now, I know it wouldn't have looked like a real ZX Spectrum, but this doesn't look like a real ZX Spectrum because it's missing all those buttons. I think they just chose a little bit form over function on this one, which is unfortunate, but you know. For me personally, I would have gone something that felt a little bit better in the hands. If there's one thing that modern gamers crave, it's the ability to save their games at any given moment. And, well, this little sucker here has the ability to implement save state support on any game on the ZX Spectrum, even on ones that didn't feature saving to begin with, which is pretty cool. The problem is, though, well, you kinda need an SD card because they didn't build any memory onto this thing that you can utilize, which is unfortunate. And like ROMs that you could download and play on this thing, you once again have to keep the SD card inside. And you know what? That's kind of the most retro thing about this. You need memory cards to save your games. That's kind of funny. So, is the ZX Spectrum Vega worth it? Well, for me personally, I kind of found it interesting. Being able to plug it up to my TV with 1,000 built-in games was really easy to use and really fun. And although some of the game's controls were a little bit more complex than they needed to be, they were designed in a way that was easy to use as long as you read the instructions and had some time to kind of get them to work. If you really want to get into the real ZX Spectrum and feel the real hardware, you're probably going to want to get out and actually get the real hardware and find some way to make that work for you. Because at the end of the day, some of those games, well, they require a full keyboard input, like Elite, which just works so much better with a keyboard. This device here is for people that have never played a ZX Spectrum and want an easy way to get into it. But for the hardcore, for the ones that want the real difficult feel of a ZX Spectrum, you're gonna need to go somewhere else, because this thing simply won't provide that experience.